almost every human being alive tonight has flown. Not in a plane, not in a machine, not in any way the waking world would agree to. In the dark hours, in the quiet after the body has surrendered, something inside us rises. It lifts above rooftops, over fields it has never seen, past ceilings that no longer exist. And by morning, we forget how ordinary this miracle has become. If you are here, listening in the low light of your own room, then welcome. Settle in slowly. There is no hurry tonight. If these long, wandering journeys through the quieter corners of what it means to be human have found a place in your evenings, a soft subscribe helps others like you find their way here too. And for those who sense there is always something more underneath, the truths this conversation only brushes against, the thoughts the noise of the day buries before we can hear them, that deeper current continues in the quiet room, on Patreon, for people like us, for minds that don't switch off. The link waits in the description whenever you're ready. Tonight, we drift toward a single strange question, a body bound to the ground, a mind that rises anyway. Why the sky opens only when the eyes close, and what that gentle contradiction might be trying so patiently to say to us. Feel for a moment the weight of your own hand, not the shape of it, not the temperature, just the quiet heaviness it carries, even when you are not thinking about it. That small pull, so familiar you have stopped noticing, is the entire planet asking your hand to stay close. And your hand obediently listens. Everything about the human body has been shaped by this one soft, unrelenting request. Our bones grew thick because they had to push back against a downward force that never rests. Our muscles arranged themselves in patterns designed to lift, to hold, to carry, not to soar. Even the delicate curves of the spine, that gentle S shape running down the back, exist because our ancestors stood upright inside a gravitational field that would have collapsed a less clever design. Somewhere deep in the inner ear, in a tiny curl of fluid and hair-like sensors, a small organ keeps track of which way is down. It does this every second of every day, without asking permission, without pausing for breath. It is called the vestibular system, and it is essentially a private compass, not for direction, but for gravity itself. If you tilt your head slightly right now, that quiet compass adjusts. If you close your eyes and lean, it still knows. It has been calibrated, cell by cell, for one specific world. And this is where the wonder begins to unfold. Because our body isn't just standing on the earth. It is, in a much deeper sense, made of the earth's pull. Every ounce of our density, every ratio of our proportions, every reflex tucked into the spine, all of it assumes a planet of this exact mass, spinning at this exact speed, holding us with this exact tenderness. Some have wondered what a human body would even be without gravity to shape it. Astronauts who spend months in orbit return with softer bones, weaker hearts, longer spines. Their bodies begin to forget the language of the ground, and that forgetting happens quickly, within weeks, sometimes within days, which means the body we know isn't a permanent thing. It is a conversation, a slow, lifelong conversation with the floor beneath our feet. There is something quietly beautiful in that. You are not simply on the earth. You are, in a way, in constant dialogue with it. Every step is a reply, every breath a small negotiation. The pressure in your joints, the tension in your calves, the weight settling into your shoulders as the evening deepens. These are not burdens. They are the shape of belonging. And yet, this belonging comes with a quiet cost. The same forces that built us also bound us. The very features that make us so remarkably suited to walking, running, climbing, reaching, they are the features that make rising into the air impossible. Our design is a gift, but it is a specific gift. The sky is not part of the offer, which raises a soft, curious question, one we will let float above us as the night unfolds. If the body was so carefully sculpted to stay near the ground, then where and how did the flying come from? Because the strange truth is, we do fly, just not here, not now, not while awake, somewhere else, in some other version of ourselves, we rise. And that, more than anything, is what we have gathered here tonight to gently understand. Picture a sparrow lifting from a windowsill. The tiny push of its legs, the sudden fan of its wings, the way the whole small body seems to become lighter than it should be. It happens so quickly that we rarely think about how strange it actually is. A living thing defying the same pull that keeps us pressed to the sidewalk. And it does this without effort, without ceremony, as if the air were simply another kind of ground. Now picture yourself trying the same motion. Arms wide, a running start, a hopeful leap. Nothing happens, not because you are doing it wrong, but because the physics of the human body politely refuses. The reason lives in something called wing loading, a ratio between the weight of a creature and the surface area available to push against the air. Birds have solved this ratio in extraordinary ways. Their bones are hollow, threaded with tiny reinforcements. Their chest muscles are enormous relative to their size. Their feathers create a surface that is both light and strong, curved in a way that turns the air itself into a soft, reliable staircase. We, on the other hand, are solid, beautifully, undeniably solid. Our bones are dense because we needed them to carry us across long distances on the ground. Our muscles are heavy because they were built for lifting, for endurance, for climbing hills that lasted for hours. If we were to grow wings in proportion to our current weight, some estimates suggest they would need to span nearly 7 meters, wider than a small car is long. And even then, the muscles required to flap them would have to be so massive that the whole body would collapse under its own machinery. There is something quietly humbling in that. Flight for us is not simply hard, it is architecturally impossible. Not a matter of trying harder, or building stronger arms, or learning some forgotten technique. The equations themselves close the door. And yet, when you look at it from another angle, the impossibility begins to feel less like a limit and more like a design choice. Every species trades one gift for another. Birds gave up strength and stamina for weightlessness. They cannot lift heavy objects, cannot dig deep, cannot survive long swims or long climbs. Their bodies are miracles of the air, but fragile miracles. A sparrow lives on average only a few years. We chose the other path. Or rather, the long, patient shaping of time chose it for us. We became creatures of the ground because the ground offered something the sky could not. Stability, tools, fire, memory. Our hands, freed from the demand of flight, learnt to build. Our shoulders, no longer needing to power wings, learnt to throw, to lift, to carry a child across a valley. Some have wondered whether the human body is simply a bird that traded its wings for hands. Whether, somewhere in the deep, slow branching of life, we made a quiet exchange, feathers for fingers, sky for civilization. There is a strange kind of tenderness in that idea. The reason we cannot fly is the same reason we can write, paint, hold another person's face gently in our palms. Every gift is also a boundary. Every boundary is also a gift. And so the sky remains, above us, out of reach, but only for the body. The mind, as we will see, was never bound by the same equations. Some of you may have felt it just as sleep began to arrive. That sudden involuntary jerk. A leg kicks. A hand twitches. Sometimes the whole body flinches, as if catching itself from an invisible edge. You surface for a moment, blink into the darkness, then settle back into the pillow. It passes so quickly you might forget it happened. That small motion has a name, the hypnic jerk. And though it seems like a random glitch, some researchers believe it may be one of the oldest reflexes we carry. A whisper from a version of ourselves that lived long, long before us. The theory goes something like this. Millions of years ago, our distant ancestors slept in trees. Branches were safer than the ground, which was crowded with predators. But branches are also treacherous. As muscles relax into sleep, grip loosens, the body begins to slip. And so, over countless generations, something clever developed, a sudden burst of muscle activation, timed exactly to the moment the body might have started to fall. A tiny alarm system, hardwired into the nervous system, designed to save a sleeping creature from tumbling into the dark below. We no longer sleep in trees. Our beds are wide, soft, motionless. And yet, the reflex remains. Every night, in bedrooms across the world, bodies rehearse a catch that no longer needs to happen. It is one of the most quietly moving things about being human, a gesture directed at a danger that vanished long before we were born. The vestibular system, that small compass of gravity tucked into the inner ear, plays a role here too. When the body begins to drift towards sleep, the inputs from the world grow faint. The ear listens for signs of falling, and sometimes, in the confusion of that shifting state, it seems to think we are. So it signals the muscles to react, to catch, to reach. There is something almost poetic in the fact that our first act as we surrender to sleep is often a small imitation of falling, as if the body must rehearse its ancient fear one final time before it can let go. And here is where the mystery deepens a little. Because if the body carries such a deep, ancient memory of falling, then perhaps the mind carries the mirror of it. Perhaps the reason flying feels so vivid, so intuitive in dreams, is that some part of us has been thinking about the air for longer than we can imagine. Not in the way birds think, but in the way something that once lived among the branches might still remember what it felt like to move between them, to leap, to glide briefly from one high place to another. Nobody can prove this. It is only a soft possibility, but it fits the strange quality of flying dreams, how effortless they feel, how right they seem in the moment, even to a body that has never once left the ground. And so, tucked inside the body's most primitive reflex, we find the first hint of a deeper pattern. The muscles remember falling, and somewhere in the same nervous system, in a quieter room, another part of us seems to remember rising. Two ancient memories, sleeping side by side. Only one of them still fires while we are awake. The other, we will meet soon, waits until the lights go out. Take a slow, easy breath. Notice how it fills you without effort. Notice how the air arrives, does what it needs to do, and leaves again, a small miracle repeated some 20,000 times a day, quietly, without asking anything of you. Now imagine standing on the summit of a very high mountain. The same breath, drawn the same way, feels thin, weak, as if the sky itself were holding something back. That difference between the fullness of a sea-level breath and the shallow gasp on a peak is the invisible edge of our biological world. It is the ceiling we live beneath, though we almost never see it. The atmosphere of Earth is often imagined as vast, endless, stretching upward into infinite blue. But the truth, when you look closely, is startling. The layer of air where humans can breathe comfortably and unaided is only a few kilometers thick. If the Earth were the size of an apple, that habitable layer of atmosphere would be thinner than the skin of the fruit. Some have compared it to a film of dew clinging to a stone. Delicate, barely there. And yet everything we are depends on it. Our lungs were shaped by this thin band. The tiny air sacs deep inside them, called alveoli, are exquisitely tuned to the density of oxygen at low altitudes. Rise too high, and they begin to struggle. Above roughly 8,000 meters, in what mountaineers softly call the death zone, no amount of will can compensate for the missing pressure. The body, no matter how strong, begins to fade, not from lack of trying, from a chemistry that simply no longer holds. Even birds, those masters of the sky, live within their own narrow ranges. Most species fly close to the ground, only a rare few, the bar-headed goose migrating over the Himalayas, the Rupel's vulture drifting near the edge of the troposphere, venture into thin air, and they do so with lungs and blood chemistries adapted over millions of years for that specific challenge. Ours were not, which means when we talk about flying, we tend to imagine it as an act of the body. Push harder, rise higher, break free. But the deeper truth is that we could never simply lift ourselves into the sky, even if wings were somehow given to us. The air itself would refuse. There is not enough of it high up to hold us. Our very breath would fail before our courage did. And yet, and here is where a small wonder gathers, every one of us walks around inside this thin, fragile shell of breathable atmosphere without ever really seeing it. We look up at the blue and imagine an ocean. What is actually above us is closer to a whisper. There is something quietly moving in that. Our lives, all of them, unfold in a narrow band, a slender ring of breath around a spinning world. Everything we have ever done, every love, every long walk, every night we lay awake wondering, has happened inside that ring. The sky then is not really above us. It is around us briefly, and then it thins into something we could not survive, which perhaps helps explain why we can only rise in dreams. The waking world offers a ceiling we do not usually see. The dreaming world quietly removes it. Close your eyes for a moment, without moving. Even in complete stillness, you know exactly where your arms are. You know your left foot is slightly turned. You know the weight of your head resting against whatever it rests on. No mirror is needed. No one had to tell you. This quiet, constant awareness is one of the most overlooked senses we possess. It is called proprioception, and it is sometimes described as the sixth sense, the sense of the body knowing itself. Tiny receptors buried in your muscles, tendons, and joints send a soft, ceaseless report to the brain: where you are, how you are angled, what forces are acting upon you. It happens beneath thought, beneath even attention, and nearly every message in that stream carries a hidden reference. The direction of down, the soles of your feet. When you stand, feel the weight of your whole body pressing into the floor. Sit, and the sensation moves to the backs of your thighs. Lie down, and it spreads across your back, your shoulders, the back of your skull. Wherever you are in this moment, some part of you is being gently held by the ground, and some part of your nervous system is quietly noting it. We often think of touch as something we do, reaching out, brushing a surface, feeling the texture of a page. But most of what we feel, we are not choosing to feel. We are simply being told, second by second, how the earth is holding us. It is a low, constant hum beneath awareness. A background music we forget is playing. Some have suggested that this hum is where much of our sense of self quietly lives. Not in thought, not in language, but in the pressure of a chair, the give of a mattress, the subtle push of the floor into the arch of a bare foot. Without these signals, the self begins to blur. There is a strange experiment sometimes done in laboratories, where a person is placed in warm, dark water, floating in complete silence, their body neutrally buoyant. In such conditions, proprioception fades, and with it, something curious happens. The boundaries of the self begin to feel less certain. Some people report their body dissolving. Others describe a sense of expansion, as if they were no longer contained. It seems that being held by the earth is not just a physical fact. It is part of how we know we exist as a shape at all. The ground doesn't only carry us, it defines us. And so when we sleep, and the mattress absorbs our weight so completely that pressure spreads evenly across our whole surface, something changes. The signals of the ground grow soft, uniform, almost silent. Not gone, but muted. The body, for a while, no longer feels like it is landing anywhere in particular. Perhaps this is one of the small preparations sleep makes for flight. Not the flight of wings, but the flight of experience. When the skin stops reporting the pressure of the world, the brain has a little more freedom to imagine there is no world beneath it at all. For now, though, notice the pressure where you rest. The gentle firmness holding you exactly where you are. It has been there this whole time, patient and quiet, a background hum that never asks for thanks. A soft companion telling you, in a language older than words, exactly where you are. If you have ever stood at the edge of a high place, a cliff, a balcony, a glass floor in a tall building, you have felt it. A quiet tightening in the chest, a pull of the stomach, a whisper from somewhere old, saying, "No, not here." The rational mind knows the railing is solid. The eyes know the drop is safe to look at. And yet some deeper part of you disagrees, without needing to be asked. This is one of the most ancient reactions the human body carries. The fear of falling is one of the very first fears we develop. Newborn babies, only days old, will react to the sensation of being dropped, even briefly, even gently, with a full body startle. Arms fling outward, fingers spread, The whole small body reaches for something to hold on to. It is called the Moro reflex, and no one has to teach it. It arrives already installed. Some have wondered why this fear is so unusually early, so unusually deep. Other fears, of the dark, of strangers, of certain animals, appear later, shaped by experience and culture. But falling seems to be waiting inside us from the very first breath, as if the body already knew, before it ever fell, that gravity was a serious matter. The startle reflex, that sudden flinch we experience even as adults, is another echo of this same wisdom. A loud sound behind you, a sudden shadow, a stumble on a curb. In all these moments, the body prepares itself instantly, without waiting for thought. And in nearly every version of that reflex, the primary concern is not injury in general, it is losing balance, losing footing, losing the ground. Falling, in the ancient logic of the body, is close to synonymous with death, not because every fall is fatal, but because the falls that mattered over the long shaping of our species so often were. A hunter slipping from a ledge, a child tumbling from a branch, a traveller misjudging the edge of a river gorge. The genes that recoiled from that possibility were the ones that carried forward, which makes the flying dream even more strange, because the same body that lives in quiet dread of falling, the same nervous system that flinches at balconies, at ladders, at the sudden loss of the floor, releases entirely into flight when the eyes close. There is no dread in the dream, no sickness in the stomach, no urge to reach for something to hold. The height feels safe, the air feels solid. The very direction the waking body fears becomes, in the dreaming mind, a doorway. Some have wondered whether this is one of the quiet, curious signs that dreams operate on their own logic, a logic that runs, in certain moments, exactly opposite to the fears we carry while awake, as if part of us knows, when the outer world falls away, that gravity was only ever half of the story. Or perhaps there is something even simpler at work. Perhaps the waking body fears falling because it knows falling is possible, and perhaps the dreaming mind loves rising because it knows something the body cannot. That in the space of imagination, the ground is negotiable and the sky is patient, and the fear that lives in one world does not have to travel with us into the other. Somewhere in the middle of the night, without you noticing, something remarkable happens. The body grows still, deeply still. If you were watching yourself sleep, you might think you had gone quiet in every way, but inside the skull, under the closed eyelids, the brain has just lit up. Some regions of it are now working nearly as hard as when you are awake, sometimes harder. This is REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. It arrives in soft, recurring tides throughout the night, each one a little longer than the last, and it carries a strange contradiction that scientists have puzzled over for decades. During REM, the muscles of the body are almost entirely paralyzed. A signal from the brainstem, deep at the base of the skull, quietly shuts down the pathways that would normally let the body move. Arms cannot lift, legs cannot run, the voice cannot speak, and yet, in that exact moment, the mind is often in wild motion, running, falling, talking, reaching, and, sometimes, rising into a sky it has invented. Some have described this as one of the most beautiful paradoxes in all of biology. The body is more still than at any other time, even deeper stillness than in dreamless sleep. But the mind is not sleeping. The mind is somewhere else entirely. It is walking through rooms that do not exist, hearing voices that were never recorded, feeling wind on skin that has not moved in hours. Why this arrangement exists is still a soft mystery. Some researchers believe the paralysis is a safety mechanism. The brain, when running vivid scenarios, must not let the body act them out. Imagine what would happen if every dream translated into motion. The bed would be a battlefield. Some rare people, in fact, do experience a disorder in which the paralysis fails, and they physically enact their dreams. Their sleeping partners describe them speaking, punching the air, sometimes running from the bed. It is a quiet reminder that the still body beside you at night is not still by accident. It is being held still, by the brain itself, and this stillness may be exactly what makes the flying dream possible, because when the body cannot move, the usual feedback loop between muscles and mind grows silent. The brain no longer receives the constant report of gravity pulling on the arms, of the ground pressing back against the feet. Something in that silence seems to loosen. In the absence of physical information, the mind is free to model the body however it wishes. Weightless, rising, untethered, there is a small wonder tucked inside that thought. The reason we cannot move in our dreams may be the very reason we can fly in them. The paralysis is not a limitation, it is a kind of blank canvas, a quiet, protected space where the mind can experiment with what it might be like to be a different kind of self. And some have wondered whether this nightly experiment is more than idle play, whether the mind, given a few hours each night to imagine a body without weight, is doing something important, rehearsing, repairing, remembering. Nobody yet knows for certain, but every night, in bedrooms all over this quiet planet, brains are rising while bodies rest, and come morning, we barely speak of it. There is a quiet organ we rarely think about, tucked deep inside each ear. During the day, it never stops working. It measures the tilt of your head, the shift of your weight, the direction the world is pulling. It is a small, patient instrument, translating every motion into information for the brain. Without it, standing up would feel like trying to balance on the deck of a rolling ship. But when sleep arrives, and especially when REM sleep begins, something quite unusual happens to this small instrument. Its signals to the brain grow faint, not because it stops working entirely, but because the brain begins to listen differently. The stream of gravity-related information that shapes our waking sense of body position becomes muted, softened, almost bracketed off from awareness. Some researchers believe this vestibular hush is one of the deepest reasons flying dreams feel so vivid. In the waking world, the brain is constantly told which way is down, every second without pause. That information is so foundational, so relentless, that we do not experience it as information at all. We experience it as reality. Down is not a fact. Down is the felt shape of existence, but when the signal quiets, that felt shape softens. Down loosens, up loosens. The body, without knowing where the ground is, begins to hover in a kind of internal ambiguity, and into that ambiguity, the dreaming brain paints its scenes. Imagine for a moment a room in which no one has spoken for hours, and then, suddenly, someone plays a note on a violin. In the deep silence, that single note fills the entire room. It seems larger, richer, more real than any note played in a busy street. This is something like what happens in the vestibular quiet of sleep. Small imaginings, freed from the constant chatter of gravity, are able to expand into full experiences. A soft thought of rising becomes an entire flight. There is another way to see it. During waking life, you carry a kind of internal map of your body, where each limb is, how much it weighs, what forces are acting on it. Scientists sometimes call this a body schema. Through the day, that map is stabilized by all the sensory feedback pouring in. But in REM sleep, without that feedback, the map begins to drift. And the drifting map is what allows the sleeping mind to imagine bodies it has never actually inhabited. Bodies without weight. Bodies that glide, bodies that pass through clouds. Some have wondered whether this is why in flying dreams the sensation is rarely of using effort. We do not usually flap. We do not usually strain. We rise the way a thought rises, smoothly, silently, as if lifting with the most natural motion in the world. Perhaps this is because the mind, in that moment, is not overriding gravity. It is simply not being told about gravity at all. Here then is a small, tender thought to drift with. Every night, deep in the middle hours, a tiny sensor in your inner ear grows quiet, and in the space of that quiet, you become, for a while, a creature that has never known weight. Not because you have escaped the earth, but because the earth briefly has stopped whispering into your ear. There is a strip of tissue running across the top of your brain, from ear to ear, quietly organizing every intentional movement you have ever made. Wiggle a finger, and part of it fires. Blink, and another part responds. It is called the motor cortex, and it does not simply command muscles, it plans them. Before your arm lifts a cup, this region has already rehearsed the entire motion in miniature, silently, in the split second before the muscles obey. Now here is a soft strangeness. During REM sleep, when the body is paralyzed, this same region does not go dark. Brain scans reveal that the motor cortex remains active, sometimes vigorously so. If a person is dreaming of walking, the parts of the motor cortex responsible for walking flicker with signals. Dreaming of speaking? The regions tied to speech light up. The whole planning apparatus is running, sending commands into a body that has been gently prevented from carrying them out, which means, in a sense, that during a dream you are trying to move. Not metaphorically, literally. The instructions to lift, to run, to reach are being drafted in real time. They just never arrive at the muscles. The paralysis intercepts them at the base of the brain, holding them like sealed letters that are never sent. Some researchers describe this as one of the strangest performances the brain ever gives. Every night it directs a complete play with movements, gestures, expressions for an actor who cannot move. The play still happens. It is simply performed inside the mind alone. This may be part of why dreams feel so bodily, why a running dream leaves you slightly out of breath, why a fighting dream can make you tense in ways that linger into morning. The motor cortex is not idly imagining these things. It is behaving in many ways as if they were really happening. Some studies have even shown that if a person practices a skill in a dream, like playing an instrument, certain physical improvements can appear the next day. Faintly, softly, but measurably. And when we consider flight in this light, something interesting appears. In a flying dream, the motor cortex is doing something it has never done in waking life. It is planning motions the body has never actually performed. There is no learned muscle memory for lifting into the air, and yet the brain seems to have no trouble at all inventing the sequence. Some inner region simply says, "Rise," and the entire model of the body responds, which raises a soft, curious question. Where does that instruction come from? How does a species that never once flew learn to script such motion so effortlessly in the dark? Perhaps the brain has no fixed idea of what the body must be. Perhaps given the right silence, it can imagine any body at all. A body with wings, a body without weight, a body of light, and so, in a strange and gentle way, every flight dream is a small act of choreography. The motor cortex, freed from the demands of any real-world muscle, becomes something like a painter drawing motion for its own quiet pleasure. Motion the body will never make, motion no one but you will ever witness. And in that unwitnessed motion we rise. There is a small, strange fact that dream researchers have gathered over many years from many corners of the world. Ask a stranger in nearly any country, on nearly any continent, whether they have ever flown in a dream. Most will say yes. Not once, many times. And when they describe it, the descriptions echo one another with a quietness that feels almost uncanny. The sensation of rising is nearly always effortless. The height is nearly always safe. The sky feels close, breathable, forgiving. Even people who have never left their villages, who have never seen an airplane except perhaps as a distant white line, describe the same soft ascent, the same weightless drift, the same sense that this rising is somehow deeply, quietly familiar. Some researchers, sifting through dream reports from cultures as different as the Inuit, the Mongolian steppe, the villages of Amazonia, and the cities of Europe, have noticed how similar these accounts are. Different languages, different climates, different beliefs about what dreams are. And yet the flight itself, in its essence, seems to belong to no one and to everyone. There is something deeply strange in this. Most dream content varies wildly by culture. What a person dreams about work, family, food, danger, all of these are shaped by the life around them. But flying seems to sit in a different category. It rises above the specifics. It does not care what century you live in or what language you dream in. It is simply there, waiting, as if woven into the shared inner architecture of our species. Some have wondered what that shared architecture actually is. Because dreams are notoriously private, no two people have ever inhabited the exact same dream, and yet, somewhere beneath the endless variation, certain patterns keep appearing. Falling, being chased, losing teeth, arriving somewhere unprepared, and flying, especially flying. One soft possibility is that these recurring themes represent the deepest common concerns of being human. Losing our footing, being pursued, losing what protects us, being seen before we are ready, and, on the gentler side, being lifted beyond the limits of the body. If that is true, then flying is not just a random invention of the sleeping mind. It is one of a small handful of emotional shapes the brain seems to reach for again and again, across every kind of life. There is another possibility, quieter and more mysterious, that the mind carries certain images, not because they were learned, but because they were somehow given by evolution, by shared brain structure, by whatever it is that makes any two humans from opposite ends of the earth still able to recognize a smile, a lullaby, a grief. If the smile is universal and the lullaby is universal, then perhaps the flight is universal too. Some have wondered whether, in the space of the dreaming mind, we briefly meet each other. Not literally, not in any way that can be proven, but in the sense that when we rise, in our own private night, someone else, a stranger on the other side of the world, may be rising too, in a dream shaped almost identically to ours, and neither of us will ever know. There is a soft companionship in that thought, a kind of hidden kinship, only visible when the eyes are closed. Most dreams unfold without asking your permission. You are simply there, moving through them as if they were real, believing whatever they tell you until the moment of waking. But for a small percentage of sleepers, on some nights something startling happens. In the middle of the dream, a quiet realization arrives. This is not real, I am dreaming. And in that instant, the dream does not usually vanish. Instead, it becomes something different, something rare, something the dreamer can, in certain small ways, shape. This is lucid dreaming. And for a long time, science treated it as folklore. The idea that a sleeping person could be aware they were dreaming, could think within the dream, could remember later, seemed too strange to test. But in the late 1970s, a researcher named Stephen LaBerge and others found a way. Since the eyes still move during REM sleep, they asked lucid dreamers to signal from within the dream using pre-agreed eye movements, left, right, and the signals arrived, recorded on instruments, from people who were by every other measure deeply asleep. There is something quietly astonishing in that, a message sent from inside a dream to the waking world. A hand raised softly from the other side of consciousness, and of all the things lucid dreamers report, one of the most common, one of the first things many of them try to do, is fly. Some describe running and simply willing themselves upward. Others describe spreading arms and rising like a diver in slow motion. Others describe no motion at all, only intention. A quiet thought, up, and the whole dream world tilts to accommodate it. Some have wondered what this reveals about the nature of the sleeping mind, because in lucid flight, the dreamer is not passively receiving an image. They are choosing it, shaping it, and yet the sky they rise into looks and feels remarkably consistent. The air still has a certain gentle resistance, clouds still drift with weight. The world of the dream, even when directed, obeys some deeper rules that the mind is not making up in the moment, which suggests that inside every mind is something like an inner physics of possibility, a soft private set of rules for how imagined worlds behave, different from waking rules, but not lawless, not random, coherent in its own quiet way. And so, lucid flight raises a soft, layered question. Are we, in that moment, simply directing an illusion, or are we discovering an interior landscape? A landscape as vast and consistent as any waking country, that was there all along, waiting for us to notice. Some lucid dreamers describe returning to the same skies, recognizing the same shapes of hills, seen from above, night after night, as if the geography of the mind, when explored patiently, begins to reveal itself. Nobody can say what this really means. It might be simple pattern making, the brain reusing its own scenery, or it might be something else, a hint that consciousness is a larger house than we usually walk through. For now, it is enough to know this. Some sleepers rise on purpose. They know they are dreaming, they choose to fly, and when they wake, they remember every detail, which means, in some quiet, undeniable way, the sky in our minds is not less real than the one above our rooftops, only differently real. Dreams, whatever else they are, carry weather. Some feel heavy, some feel bright, some leave a residue in the chest for hours after waking, a sadness whose source we cannot quite name, or a strange lift, as if something invisible had shifted overnight. And when researchers have looked closely at the emotional colouring of flying dreams, a soft pattern begins to appear. Most flying dreams are pleasant, sometimes deeply so. They are more often associated with feelings of freedom, joy, expansion, and release than with any other single dream image. People describe waking from them with a rare kind of buoyancy, a lightness that lingers into the morning coffee, that quietly reshapes the tone of the day. Some have wondered whether this is coincidence, or whether the flying dream is doing something for us. Something the sleeping mind understands, even if the waking mind never puts it into words. One possibility, gently proposed by some researchers who study dream function, is that sleep does more than sort memories. It may also process feelings. In particular, some believe that dreams help metabolize emotional experiences, softening what was sharp during the day, releasing what has grown too tight. In this view, the dreaming mind is a slow, patient hand, kneading the tensions of waking life into something the body can rest with. And flight, within that hand, may be one of its most elegant tools, because so many of the pressures we carry through the day, deadlines, expectations, disappointments, quiet fears, feel like weights. We literally describe them that way. The weight of responsibility, the weight of the world, the weight on our shoulders. It is not an accident that the language of struggle is so often the language of gravity. If the mind wanted to offer relief, then what better shape could it use than the shape of rising? Not a lecture about letting go, not a memory being rearranged, just a direct, wordless experience of being unweighted, of the body drifting up into an air that no longer asks anything of it. Some studies have noticed that people going through periods of stress or transition report more flying dreams than usual. Not always, not universally, but often enough to raise a soft eyebrow, as if, when the day has been especially heavy, the night quietly offers a corresponding lift. A small counterweight, delivered in the private theatre of sleep. There is something tender in that idea, even if we cannot prove it, even if the mechanisms remain unclear. The possibility that some part of you, tonight, might rise for a few minutes into a soft imagined sky, not by accident, but as a quiet answer to something the day pressed too firmly against your chest, is a beautiful possibility. Not every flying dream, of course, is joyful. Some involve struggle, wobbling, uncertain heights. Some involve trying to rise and only barely leaving the ground. These too carry meaning. They may reflect times when the release we long for feels just out of reach, when the wish to lift is present, but the weight has not yet loosened. But even those dreams tend to carry hope in them. The wobble is upward, the struggle is a struggle to rise. Whatever the emotional weather of a flight dream, it belongs to the family of ascents, and that perhaps tells us something quietly important about what the mind wants when no one is watching. Think back to a dream you remember, any dream, and consider for a moment its geography. Perhaps you were walking through a house that felt like your childhood home, but wasn't. Perhaps you were in a city that looked familiar and completely invented at the same time. Perhaps the hallway kept getting longer as you walked it, or the door opened onto a place it should not have been able to reach. We tend to accept these strangenesses inside the dream. It is only afterward, in the light of waking, that we notice how completely the ordinary laws of the world were being ignored. Something quiet has been happening inside your skull, night after night. The mind has been running a version of reality that follows rules very close to the waking world, but not quite. In dreams, mass drifts, distances stretch, time folds back on itself, and most tellingly for our journey, gravity becomes a suggestion rather than a command. Some researchers have described the dreaming brain as running a kind of simulation, not of the world exactly, but of something like the world, filtered, remixed, softened where softness helps, and sharpened where meaning gathers. And in this simulation, certain laws relax. Objects can pass through each other, people can shift into other people mid-sentence, and the ground sometimes gives way to sky. There is a soft wonder in this, because it means the mind is not merely storing reality. It is capable of running an entirely different physics whenever it chooses, a physics with its own rules, a physics no textbook has ever tried to describe, and some have wondered whether these rewritten rules are random or whether they carry their own hidden logic. Because dream physics, though flexible, is not chaotic. Certain patterns recur, objects tend to have weight until the plot no longer requires it. Water still feels wet, cold still feels cold. Even in flight, the sky still curves overhead, the ground still spreads below. The mind seems to keep just enough of the waking world to make the dream believable, while quietly discarding whatever the story does not need. This is a curious kind of selective realism, as if the brain is not building a false world but a partial one, a stripped-down replica of reality, tuned to whatever meaning the sleeper's inner life is exploring. If the meaning of the dream calls for freedom, gravity fades. If it calls for constraint, gravity intensifies, and the dreamer finds themselves unable to move fast enough, unable to run through thickening air. There is a quiet philosophy tucked into this, because it hints that our sense of what is real, what is possible, and what is impossible may be shaped less by the world's rules than by our need to trust them. In waking life, we require a stable world, so the brain gives us one. In sleep, we require something else, meaning digestion, imagination, and so the brain reshapes the rules to serve that need. Some have called dreams a private universe, a universe with a population of one, and in that universe some of the deepest laws of the waking world are gently rewritten, night after night, by an author who is also the audience, who is also the setting, who is also, in some strange sense, the sky itself, which begins to help explain why flight in dreams feels so effortless. Not because the mind has broken the law of gravity, but because in this smaller universe, gravity was only ever a story, and the story is not required to end the same way twice. Something quiet is happening behind your eyes right now. Even as you rest, listening, your brain is not simply receiving the world, it is predicting it every moment. In a background so silent you have never heard it, the brain is asking itself, what should come next? What shape should this sound take? What sensation should follow the last one? And when the answers match reality, you feel calm continuity. When they don't, you feel surprise. This is called predictive processing, and it has become one of the more interesting ideas in neuroscience over the last few decades. The waking brain, in this view, is not a passive receiver. It is more like a very patient, very fast forecaster, constantly generating small models of what the next second will probably look like, sound like, feel like, and then comparing those models against the incoming signals from the eyes, ears, skin, joints. When the models match, you experience the world as smooth, ordinary, familiar. When they don't, the brain updates. A branch snaps behind you. The model of a quiet forest is revised in an instant. Your foot expects a step and finds an unexpected dip. The whole body reorients in a flash. Something interesting happens when we consider what this means for dreaming, because during sleep the flow of incoming signals is drastically reduced. The eyes are closed, the skin is still, the ears are hearing very little, and the vestibular system, as we saw earlier, has gone soft, which means the brain is still generating predictions, but there is almost nothing to check them against. Some have wondered whether this is one of the deep reasons dreams feel so strange. The predictive engine is still running, but the reality check has quietly stepped away. Whatever the mind imagines, it accepts. Whatever image floats up next, it treats as real. There is no incoming signal to disagree, and into this absence, the mind is free to model bodies it has never had, skies it has never seen, motions it has never performed. In a sense, dreaming is what the predictive brain does when nothing is stopping it from being wrong, which reframes something important. In waking life, imagining flight is possible, but limited. The ground signals in your feet, the pressure signals in your seat, the visual signals from the walls, all of them are constantly correcting the brain, reminding it, no, you are not flying, you are here, sitting, still. But in sleep, those corrections vanish, and the imagined flight becomes the only signal, which makes it, for the duration of the dream, indistinguishable from reality. Some have described this as the mind's rehearsal space, a quiet workshop where it can try out worlds without penalty, not because it needs to prepare for any of them, but because the machinery of forecasting cannot fully switch itself off. It runs night after night, generating possible worlds, and a few of those worlds happen to include sky. There is a small wow tucked inside this. The reason dreams can feel more real than waking life, sometimes, is not because they are more true. It is because there is nothing left to argue with them. Your own brain, without contradiction, becomes the entire universe. And for a few soft hours, in that unarguable universe, you are lighter than air. Not because the laws changed, but because the corrections briefly stopped whispering. Perhaps the dream is not fantasy at all. Perhaps it is what happens when a forecaster is left alone in the dark. There is something quietly remarkable about what the brain does with the day after you have finished living it. As you sleep in slow layered waves, the day is reorganized. Small moments that seemed unimportant get filed away. Larger emotions get gently softened. Skills you practiced during the day are strengthened. Connections that seemed fragile become sturdier. All of this happens in the dark, without you having to lift a finger. Sleep researchers have spent decades studying this process, and though many of the details remain uncertain, a broad picture has emerged. Sleep is not just rest, it is maintenance. It is the mind, in a quieter light, sorting through the mail it received during the day. And here is where dreams may come in. Some scientists believe dreams, especially the vivid REM ones, are part of this sorting, not literal replays of the day, but symbolic reweavings. The mind takes emotional threads, memory threads, sensory threads, and stitches them into new fabric, sometimes strange fabric, sometimes beautiful fabric, but always, in some way, made from the raw material of what we have lived. If this is even partially true, then flying dreams become deeply interesting, because flight, in the language of feeling, is often the shape of accomplishment, of escape, of aspiration. When you push through something difficult during the day, when you finish a project, when you feel a rare wave of confidence, some part of the mind may take that emotion and translate it into imagery, and that imagery, for reasons perhaps as old as we are, tends to look like rising. Some have wondered whether the flying dream is essentially a private symbol, not chosen by us, but reached for by the brain when it needs a shape to give a feeling. A day of small victories becomes a night of gentle ascent. A moment of quiet self-forgiveness becomes an open sky. A patient release of an old worry becomes weightlessness above a familiar hill. There is another layer to this. Sleep also seems to soften our fears. Sharp anxieties, when carried into deep sleep and dreaming, tend to lose some of their edge by morning. Some researchers describe this as a nightly emotional processing, the mind gently sanding down the day's rougher moments while the body rests. And within that softening, the flying dream may serve a specific role, not just to symbolize accomplishment, but to actively offer the feeling of release. The body has been carrying a weight. The mind hands it, for a while, a version of itself with no weight at all. Some have gone further, wondering whether these dreams are a form of quiet inner rehearsal. Not for actual flight, but for the emotional posture of freedom when we return, later, to a difficult daytime challenge. Some invisible residue may remain from the night's imagined lift, a subtle sense that something in us can rise, even if it cannot be described. Nobody can prove this. It is a soft hypothesis, holding hands with a larger mystery, but it fits with the way many people describe feeling after a strong flying dream, a quiet lightness that lasts into the day, a small trust that something in them is more spacious than they usually notice. And so, in the middle of the night, the mind may be doing what the waking day rarely permits, taking your accomplishments, your longings, your quiet inner reachings, and building a sky from them, not to distract you, to let you feel, in the shape of a dream, what your life has begun to become. Somewhere inside your brain, there is a picture of you, not your face, not your name, a picture of your body, how large each part is, where it ends, how it moves. This picture is called the body schema, and it lives across several regions of the brain that quietly work together, minute by minute, to remind you what shape you are. The strange thing is, this picture is not a photograph. It is a model, which means it can be adjusted, distorted, and, in certain conditions, completely rewritten. Neuroscientists have known this for a long time. When someone loses a limb, for example, the brain often still holds onto its map of that limb. The person may feel their missing arm move, may feel it itch, may feel it curl into a familiar shape. This is called phantom limb sensation, and it is one of the more haunting reminders that the body we experience is not simply the body we have. It is the body the brain remembers we have. Something quietly beautiful appears when we consider dreams within this frame, because in dreams the body schema loosens, not partially, often completely. People report inhabiting bodies that are not their own, taller, younger, older, sometimes not human at all, and again, bodies with wings or with no need of wings, bodies that simply lift. Some studies have looked closely at the flying dreams of people who lost the use of their legs earlier in life. Astonishingly, many of them still fly in their dreams. Sometimes they walk first, then fly. Sometimes they run and take off. The brain, drawing on some deeper archive, seems to remember a body it once had, or perhaps a body it never had at all, one shaped by imagination rather than experience. The self it presents in the dream is not always the self of the day. Some have wondered what this reveals about the nature of the body, because if the body we feel can be so easily reshaped in sleep, then perhaps the body we feel while awake is also, in its way, a soft construction, a negotiated agreement between the brain and its senses, a story the mind tells using signals from the muscles and skin as its raw material. That is a delicate idea, and one worth touching only gently. It does not mean the body is not real. The body is deeply real, but it does mean that the sense of being embodied, of being this shape, this weight, this specific creature, is more of a living painting than a fixed photograph, and paintings can be repainted. In the dream state, the mind repaints regularly. Sometimes the changes are subtle, sometimes they are dramatic, and sometimes, in the flying dream, the painting simply removes the frame. The body is still there, but its edges have grown loose. Gravity no longer has a firm surface to press against. The self expands into the air around it, and the two, self and sky, become one softly integrated experience. There is a small wow inside this. It suggests that the body you feel most nights walking through the ordinary world is not the only body your mind can construct. There are other versions quietly waiting, versions with different weight, different edges, different relationships with the ground. You have already met some of them in the dreams you barely remember, and perhaps you will meet another tonight. A version of yourself that, for a few minutes, no longer needs the floor to know it exists. If you have ever watched a sleeping dog, you have seen something curious. The paws twitch, the nose flickers. Sometimes a soft, muffled sound escapes. It looks, for all the world, like the animal is doing something inside the dream, chasing, running, perhaps calling out. And in a real, measurable way, it probably is. REM sleep, that vivid dreaming state we have been circling all night, does not belong to humans alone. Nearly every mammal shows it. So do birds. Even reptiles seem to display something faintly similar, and in an especially strange and beautiful discovery, octopuses have been observed shifting into brief states that resemble REM, complete with rapid changes in the color of their skin. Whatever they are experiencing in those moments, no one yet knows, but the presence of dreaming in creatures so different from us gently suggests that dreaming, in some form, is very, very old. And here is where a soft question begins to drift upward. If mammals dream, do they dream about the things they cannot do? Consider a dog. During the day it runs. Its dreams, based on the pattern of its twitches, seem to involve running as well. Dogs seem to dream about being dogs, but what about creatures whose waking lives are already remarkable? What about birds? Some researchers have studied songbirds and discovered something extraordinary. When a young bird is learning to sing, the neurons involved in producing its song fire in specific patterns during the day, and at night, in sleep, those same neurons often fire again in the same order as if the bird were rehearsing its song in its dreams. It is one of the tender miracles of the animal world, a tiny creature tucked into a nest, running through its future melodies in the dark. But this raises the question we cannot help asking. If a songbird rehearses song in its sleep, does a flying bird rehearse flight? Or, more strangely, does a flying bird ever dream of not flying? Some have wondered whether creatures whose daily life is spent in the sky might, in their private dream world, imagine being still, being grounded, walking like the mammals below them on solid earth. Nobody can know. Birds cannot report their dreams. We can only watch their small feet twitch, their beaks open faintly, and guess. But there is something quietly moving in the possibility. If humans who cannot fly dream of flight, then perhaps birds who cannot easily stand still dream of stillness. Perhaps every creature dreams of what it cannot have. Perhaps the sleeping mind, whatever species it belongs to, reaches instinctively for what its waking life denies it, which makes the human flying dream feel less like an oddity and more like part of a much larger pattern. The mind in sleep seems to search for its missing counterpart. What it lacks by day, it briefly holds by night. For us, the missing thing is the sky. For a hawk, perhaps, the missing thing is the quiet of a floor that does not move. Some have said that dreams are the way life tries on other versions of itself. If that is true, then the great long history of REM sleep, spanning cats, elephants, dolphins, songbirds, octopuses, and us, becomes something like a shared inheritance, every dreaming creature, in its own private way, becoming briefly what it is not, walking when it usually flies, rising when it usually walks, meeting, in the dark, the shape of its opposite. And perhaps that is what dreaming is quietly for, not to escape the self, but to remember gently that the self was never as fixed as the day pretended it was. Deep in the walls of certain caves, some tucked into the cliffs of southern France, some hidden in Indonesia, some scattered across the plateaus of southern Africa, there are drawings. They were made in the flicker of small fires, thousands upon thousands of years ago, by people whose names we will never know. The animals they painted are astonishingly precise. Bison, horses, lions with sharp attention in their eyes, and every so often, tucked among these creatures, a stranger figure appears, a human body with something not quite human about it. Wings, or feathers, or a bird's head. A person who is also in some way flying. Nobody can be entirely sure what these images meant to the ones who painted them, but their presence is undeniable, and their pattern is striking. Across separate continents, in cultures that had no way of speaking to each other, someone reached for a wall and drew a person taking flight. Some researchers believe these images relate to early spiritual experiences. Certain ancient traditions describe practices in which a person, through trance, ritual, or the deep quiet of long meditation, entered an altered state. In these states, the practitioner would often describe rising, leaving the body, traveling across the land as if from above. Some anthropologists call this pattern shamanic flight, and versions of it have been recorded in almost every culture that keeps oral memory, which raises a very soft, very old question. What made these people, so scattered across the planet, reach for the same image? Not gods that looked alike, not stories that travelled together, but the human form itself, lifted, drawn as if some deep part of the species already knew what it wanted to draw before it drew it. Some have wondered whether these early wings on cave walls are a kind of echo, an echo of the flying dream, made permanent in stone, because for people who lived closer to the natural world than we do now, who watched hawks and eagles daily, who slept under the open sky, who woke often from the vivid dreams that quiet lives tend to produce, the sensation of flight and sleep must have felt not like fantasy, but like a real, remembered experience. Something worth painting. There is a soft possibility hidden here, that the story of humans imagining flight did not begin with mythology, or with religion, or with early inventors. It began earlier, in the private dark of caves, and even earlier in the private dark of sleep. The wing on the wall may be the wing from the dream, and the dream may be older than the wall. We tend to think of imagination as a modern faculty, something refined by education and language. But these ancient paintings suggest imagination was already fully at work in humans long before writing, long before agriculture, long before we lived in cities. Wherever there were fires, and quiet nights, and dreaming minds beneath rough animal skins, there was already this longing to lift. Some have said that the desire to rise is the oldest desire we cannot name, older than the wheel, older than the plough, older perhaps than any spoken word. And when you sit alone tonight in the low light of your room, you are, in a very quiet way, part of that same continuous longing. The same species that painted a winged human onto a cave wall is now lying, thousands of generations later, wondering why the flying dream still comes. Perhaps the answer is that it has always come, and perhaps the wall and the dream and the wondering are all one long, gentle inheritance. Long before humans understood how air worked, before anyone knew that lift depended on the shape of a wing or the flow of a moving current, we were already telling stories about flight. Not one or two stories, hundreds, perhaps thousands. Every civilization that left behind records seems to have imagined, at some point, a creature that could rise into the sky, and more often than not, they imagined a person doing so. You have probably heard of Icarus, the young man from the Greek stories who flew too close to the sun. His wings, made of feathers and wax, melted, and he fell into the sea. It is a story we tell as a warning, a lesson about overreaching, but notice what is quietly assumed inside it. That flight itself was possible, that a father could reasonably build wings for his son, that the great tragedy was not the flight but the falling. The ancient Greeks, thousands of years before any airplane, could already imagine a human wearing wings and lifting into the air. They were not alone. On the other side of the world, in the sacred stories of India, Garuda soars, a great bird being who carries gods across the sky. In the traditions of Mesoamerica, feathered serpents move between worlds, mediators between the earth and something higher. In Persian and Arabic literature, the Simurgh drifts on impossible wings above a legendary mountain. In old Chinese tales, immortals rise on cranes or ride the wind itself. In the mythologies of the north, Odin sends ravens across the sky as messengers. In Egyptian imagery, birds with human eyes hover above the recently departed. Every culture, in its own words, seems to have reached for the same idea, that the sky must be inhabited by beings capable of moving through it, that the human form in its finest or most sacred versions must one day belong there too. Some have wondered what made this impulse so universal. There were no shared textbooks, no global conversation, and yet the imagery matches, again and again, winged figures, feathered beings, ascents into cloud or star. It is as if the species were reaching, from many rooms at once, toward a single window. One soft explanation is that flight was simply what the human mind reached for when it wanted to picture transcendence. If gods lived somewhere higher than us, then to be like them meant to rise. If freedom felt like a release from limits, then the most obvious limit to release from was gravity. Every culture, working with the same body and the same sky, arrived at the same shorthand. There is something remarkable in that. Not that we imagined flight, but that we imagined it before we had any idea how it worked. The dream came long before the design. The wing appeared in the mind first, and only later, much, much later, in any workshop. Some have gone as far as to say that the airplane could not have been built if humans had not already imagined flying for thousands of years. That the myths were not distractions from reality, but rehearsals for it. Slow, generational rehearsals, passed from parent to child in stories, each retelling keeping the idea of flight alive, awake, ready, which quietly suggests something deep about the way humans reach for the impossible. First we dream, then we tell stories, then, sometimes many centuries later, we build. And behind every builder, if you look closely, there is always a long line of dreamers, and behind them, an even longer line of sleepers, quietly rising in their sleep, keeping the possibility warm through the long dark of history. There is a story, told often about Leonardo da Vinci, that as a young child he had a vivid recurring dream. In the dream, a bird descended and brushed its tail feather against his face. He never forgot it, and decades later, as an old man sketching designs for machines that no one else could yet imagine, he filled page after page of his notebooks with drawings of flying devices. Wings of leather and wood, screws that would rise through the air, machines with human bodies suspended inside them, arms working straps and pedals, imitating the flap of a bird. He never got any of them to work. Some historians suspect he never even fully built one, but his sketches are extraordinary in their patience, their attention, their quiet insistence that human flight was a solvable problem. He believed and drew and revised, and though he died long before anyone rose into the air, his ideas quietly rippled forward. He was not the only one. Over the centuries, a strange thread began to emerge in the histories of flight. Many of the men and women who worked seriously on flying machines reported vivid dreams of flying. Some kept journals, some spoke about it only later in private letters. Others let the dreams stay quietly in the background, unmentioned in their public work. Otto Lilienthal, one of the great early gliding pioneers of the 19th century, watched storks by day and, by some accounts, dreamed of soaring at night. He built glider after glider, launching himself from a small artificial hill outside Berlin, sometimes rising for several seconds at a time before drifting back to Earth. He wrote lovingly about the sensation. Then, in 1896, he fell during a flight and died shortly after. His last recorded words were said to have been, "Sacrifices must be made." A few years later, in a small workshop in Ohio, two brothers who repaired bicycles read about him. Wilbur and Orville Wright were not scientists in the formal sense. They were tinkerers, dreamers, careful readers of everything they could find. They built kites, then gliders. Then, in 1903, a small, awkward machine with a light engine, which lifted off a sandy hill in North Carolina for 12 seconds and travelled about 40 meters. It was not much, but for those 12 seconds, human beings had done something new, or perhaps something very, very old, something they had been doing every night in their sleep, brought at last into the waking world. Some have wondered whether the flying dream is the quiet architect of these inventions, not because it provides blueprints, but because it keeps something alive, a conviction, a memory of what it feels like to rise. Without that memory, would anyone have kept building through so many failures? Would Da Vinci have sketched? Would Lilienthal have climbed his little hill again and again? Would the Wright brothers have kept adjusting propellers late into the night? Perhaps not. Perhaps invention needs more than intelligence. Perhaps it needs the deep, wordless confidence that comes only from having already, in some private inner room, done the thing. There is a soft thought hidden here, that every airplane, every helicopter, every drone humming above a park, may owe part of its existence to the dreams of countless people who never built anything at all, ordinary sleepers, in ordinary beds, rising each night into imagined skies. Their dreams merged invisibly into a collective knowing that flight was possible, until finally, one bright day, a machine caught up to the mind. Sometimes, if you read the memoirs of astronauts, you come across a strange sentence, written in different ways by different people from different missions, but the shape of it is nearly always the same. When they first floated freely inside their spacecraft, untethered from any surface, drifting weightlessly through a small humming room in orbit, they described the sensation as being familiar, as if they had felt it before. That is a curious thing to say, because the human body, evolved on a planet with a single unchanging gravitational field, has almost no waking experience of true weightlessness. A pool comes close, but never quite matches it. A roller coaster gives a brief disorienting hint. A skydiver, falling through the atmosphere, feels the rush of resistance rather than the smooth absence of pull. Nothing on Earth in ordinary life produces the pure, sustained hover of orbit, and yet, over and over, astronauts report that when they first experienced it, they thought, "I know this. I have been here." Some have written about it explicitly. Others have described it more softly using words like recognition or return or a strange kind of remembering. Michael Collins, who orbited the moon during Apollo 11, wrote about the peculiar peace of floating in his craft. Chris Hadfield, decades later, described the odd homeliness of the sensation. Others have written about the way tears do not fall in weightlessness. They gather around the eyes in soft spheres, the way sleep in orbit sometimes feels closer to the sleep of dreams than the sleep of Earth. Which raises a soft, curious question. If the sensation of weightlessness is genuinely new to the waking human body, where does the feeling of familiarity come from? One possibility, gently proposed by some who have thought about this, is that the mind has been rehearsing weightlessness all along, in dreams, in flight dreams, in the countless soft ascents that most humans experience through the years, none of which they can quite describe when awake, but each of which leaves behind a residue, a small, quiet memory of what it feels like to be a body without weight. If that is even partly true, then dream flight becomes something more than symbolism. It becomes a kind of quiet training, not for actual space travel, of course, but for the internal shape of weightlessness, for what the body would feel like without the constant conversation with the ground, so that when a rare few humans finally arrive in orbit, some part of them has already been there in the dark of their childhood bedrooms. There is a small wow in this, that the astronaut, floating above the Earth for the first time, is not encountering weightlessness fresh. They are, in a strange sense, coming home to something they have felt every night of their lives, only never with the eyes open. And beyond that, there is a soft, generous thought that every one of us who has ever risen in a dream has touched, in miniature, the sensation that only a handful of humans in history have known in waking life. Not the view of Earth from above, not the technical fact of orbit, but the deeper thing beneath both, the feeling of a body without downward pull, the feeling of drifting gently in a space that no longer asks you to hold yourself up. Perhaps we do not need to travel to space to know what space feels like. Perhaps some part of us has been quietly visiting it every night, and perhaps this is why, when astronauts describe their first moments of floating, they so often reach for the same soft, mysterious word, familiar. Notice how often, in the languages people speak, freedom sounds like rising. Someone is uplifted, someone soars, a spirit takes flight, a weight is lifted. A heart, in the old phrase, lifts up. And when we describe feeling trapped, we reach for the opposite words, weighed down, pressed, grounded, held back. Even the word depression comes from a Latin root meaning to press down, as if the emotion itself were a form of gravity. Nobody sat in a committee to decide these metaphors. They emerged, on their own, in languages that never met. Ancient Sumerian, classical Chinese, Old Norse, modern Swahili. In language after language, The vertical dimension carries emotional meaning. Up is better, down is heavier, rising is release, falling is grief. Some linguists and cognitive scientists have gathered these patterns and given them a name, orientational metaphors, noting how consistently the human mind uses spatial direction to describe inner life. And of these directions, the vertical one is the most emotionally charged. It is not the most useful in practical terms. Left and right, forward and back are equally important for navigating a room, but up and down carry a kind of weight that the horizontal directions never quite match. Why should this be? Why is it that lift is joy and heaviness is sadness in nearly every human tongue? Some have wondered whether the answer is quietly hidden in the body, because when we are healthy and strong, we stand tall, we walk with a light step, we lift our heads. When we are tired, sick, or grieving, we slump, we sink into chairs, we lower our eyes. The vertical language of feeling may be nothing more than the vertical shape of the body itself, gently mapped into words. But there is another possibility, softer and more curious, that the vertical language of feeling reaches back, not only to the body's posture, but to the deep human relationship with the sky, to the sun, which rises and returns, to the moon and stars, which live in the higher realm, to birds, which move so easily through the air we cannot enter. Over long stretches of history, the sky has been the space of everything humans could not touch but longed toward. It became the natural place, in the mind, where hope, freedom, and the sacred were assumed to live. And so, when we describe an inner feeling of release, we do not have to search for the right word. We reach, without thinking, for the metaphor of flight, because it has always been there, waiting. Because the sky has been the shape of longing for so long that the two have become inseparable. There is a small, tender payoff hidden in this. Every time you say that a burden was lifted, or that your spirits rose, or that a piece of music sent you soaring, you are quietly reaching into the same well from which flying dreams also draw. You are speaking briefly the language of dream flight, without knowing you are doing it. Some have wondered whether this is why the flying dream feels so meaningful even when nothing else about it is understood. Because in the dream we are not just imagining a physical act, we are inhabiting all at once the entire emotional architecture of freedom that our species has been building in its words for thousands of years. Every metaphor of rising becomes, for a few soft minutes, an actual experience. The whole slow inheritance of language becomes, briefly, a body without weight. Perhaps flight is not a random image after all. Perhaps it is the shape our species has been slowly building, in speech and story, for the exact moments when the sky finally arrives. There is a soft way to look at limits, and there is a harsher way. The harsher way sees a limit only as a wall, something that stops us, something that closes a door we would like to walk through. The softer way sees limits differently. It notices that certain doors, when they remain closed, quietly become the frame for something else. A window opens where no window was expected, and through it something arrives that could not have arrived if the door had been open. Human flight is one of these strange gifts, not because we cannot fly, but because we cannot fly with our bodies, and can fly, freely, endlessly, in our minds. Some have wondered what would happen to us if the equations of the human body were slightly different, if our bones had been just a little lighter, our chests a little broader, our proportions a little more forgiving to lift. If flight had been simply another human skill, learned alongside walking and swimming, would we still dream about it? Almost certainly not in the way we do now. The flying dream is powerful in part because the flying is impossible. If it were ordinary, if every child grew up flapping around the room and touching ceilings, flying would feel no more magical than walking. It would drop into the background of ordinary sensation, unremarkable, unremembered. But because it cannot happen, because gravity gently and firmly refuses, the flying dream becomes something rare, something the mind must reach for, something we return from feeling as though we have been given a small private gift the waking world would not have offered. There is a strange generosity in that. Some have described it as if the universe, in the very act of denying us one thing, has quietly offered us another, not equal, not identical, but real in its own way, and perhaps more meaningful precisely because it must be travelled to through the dark. Consider for a moment what it would mean to remove the impossibility. If everyone could fly whenever they wished, no one would dream of flying. No one would paint winged figures on cave walls. No one would build machines to lift into the sky. There would be no Icarus, no Wright brothers, no astronauts describing weightlessness as familiar. The entire long human story of longing would collapse into ordinary experience, and something in us, something that thrives specifically on reaching, would fall silent. There is a quiet philosophical thought here, that limits are not simply subtractions, they are sometimes the very conditions under which certain kinds of meaning become possible. A song has meaning partly because it ends. A conversation has depth partly because words are finite. A day feels complete partly because the light does not stay. And perhaps our capacity to be lifted, in dreams and in imagination, has depth precisely because we cannot always be lifted in reality. There is something tender in this. The very heaviness that presses us into the chair tonight is what makes the sensation of imagined flight feel so pure. If we did not know weight, we would never know release. The earth in this reading is not our jailer. It is the patient co-author of every ascent we will ever know. Some have wondered whether every human limit hides a similar quiet gift. Not always. Some limits are only limits. But often, when we look closely, we find that the thing we could not do gave rise to the thing we became. The wing we never grew became the mind that could imagine wings. The sky we could not enter became the sky we could not stop reaching for. There is a curious way to think about who you are, and it becomes clearer the longer the night grows. During the day, you seem to be one continuous person, waking up, moving through your rooms, making coffee, answering messages, going about the small choreography of ordinary life. You feel like a single self, with one body, one story, one location. But in the quiet hours, something else begins to appear. A second version of you, a version that goes places the first version cannot. While your body lies still, tucked beneath a blanket, another self, call it the experiential self, or the dreaming self, or something even softer than that, is out walking. Sometimes rising, sometimes traveling across landscapes it has never physically seen. This other self does not need to keep breathing on its own, does not need to worry about the front door, and yet in the dream, it is completely, undeniably you. Some have wondered what this nightly divergence really means, because on the surface it seems simple. You have a body that stays, and a mind that wanders. But look a little closer, and the situation becomes stranger, because the mind, when wandering, is not aware of the body. It is not thinking about the mattress, or the ceiling, or the pillow. It is fully, wholeheartedly somewhere else. The self that is dreaming does not know it is also, at the same moment, a body lying quietly in the dark. And when we wake, we do not usually think of this as a strange event. We simply say, "I had a dream." But something quite profound has just happened. For a few minutes, or perhaps much longer, there were in a sense two versions of you, one horizontal and still, one vertical and moving, neither aware of the other, both real in their own way. Some philosophers, both ancient and modern, have gently reached toward this observation. They have wondered whether the sense of being a single self might be more of a daily arrangement than a permanent truth. Whether the mind's ability to become two quietly every night hints at something about consciousness that our waking language cannot easily hold. There is an old story about the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi, who dreamed he was a butterfly. When he woke, he was uncertain. Was he a man who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or was he now a butterfly dreaming of being a man? The story has drifted across centuries because it touches something we all recognize quietly, whether or not we articulate it, that the felt reality of the dream, in the moment, is complete. The dreaming self does not experience itself as a fragment, it experiences itself as whole, which means the self you are during the day, the one who worries about deadlines and remembers birthdays, is not the only kind of self you have available. There is another one, or, perhaps more accurately, The one self you are is more spacious, more layered than the ordinary boundaries of the body suggest. Some have wondered whether the ability to fly in dreams is one of the clearest reminders of this second, softer self. Because in the dream, the you who rises is not straining against physics. It is not asking permission. It is simply doing what a self, freed from the constant maintenance of the body, seems to naturally do: reach. Perhaps the two selves beneath one skin are not two selves at all. Perhaps they are one self, seen from two different weathers, one under the pressure of the day, one under the quiet of the night, both real, both yours. Every room you have ever slept in has had a ceiling. Perhaps you can picture the one above you tonight, even without opening your eyes. A soft edge, a familiar boundary, a small closure that keeps the sky from rushing in. It is such a common feature of our lives that we almost never think about it. It is only ceiling, a thing that separates one space from another. But if you look at it in a different way, the ceiling begins to feel like something else, a very quiet, very steady reminder that we live inside limits. The whole architecture of human existence is a story of ceilings, floors, walls, edges, boundaries, all designed to shape and protect the small volumes of life we call home. And here is the strange, gentle contradiction. It is often within these enclosed rooms that our biggest inner spaces open. Some have noticed this pattern across many parts of life. Poets, painters, and thinkers often describe their most expansive ideas arriving not in wide, open landscapes, but in small, quiet rooms: a study, a monastery cell, a cabin, a bedroom in the dark. As if imagination, given a quieter physical space, spreads more freely inward. The flying dream fits this pattern beautifully, because the very moments when the mind rises into the widest imagined skies are also the moments when the body is most enclosed, beneath a blanket, within a room, sometimes in a small apartment on a high floor of a large building, surrounded by other rooms just like it. And yet inside that tight geometry, an entire sky opens. Some have wondered whether human meaning lives in this exact gap, the gap between the physical container and the inner spaciousness that grows within it. Because in the outer world we are bounded. Time, height, reach, language, lifespan. Every one of us is enclosed by conditions we did not choose, but inwardly we are not bounded in the same way. Inside the smallest room, we can hold the memory of an ocean. Inside the shortest life, we can carry the entire arc of a family across generations. Inside a body that cannot rise, we can carry a sky that never ends. There is a soft possibility here that the very impossibility of flying with our bodies has quietly required us to grow larger inside. That imagination is not decoration, it is compensation, a gentle, ancient balancing, in which the mind slowly develops the exact spaciousness that the body was never given. Some have wondered whether this is one of the deep secrets of being human. Not that we are limited, all creatures are limited, but that we notice our limits, and something in us responds. Some inner room begins to build itself patiently over a lifetime, and when the outer body finally rests, that inner room opens fully. The ceiling above you tonight is not, in this reading, only a barrier. It is also a mirror. It marks the shape of the outer limit and, softly, silently, signals the presence of the inner limitlessness. The dream sky begins exactly where the ceiling ends. There is something quietly moving in that image, that every enclosed room is also a doorway. Every limit is also an invitation. Every ceiling, if you look at it long enough on a quiet night, might simply be the beginning of a wider sky, waiting for the eyes to close. You have heard, perhaps, that the brain is one of the most complex structures known. It is a phrase repeated so often that it has almost lost its meaning. But if you sit with it, softly, it becomes strange again, because the brain is not just complex in the way a machine is complex. It is complex in a way that never quite finishes settling. It is still forming, still learning, still gently rewiring, even in an adult, even in an elder, even tonight as you rest. Scientists have a name for this quality: neuroplasticity. The word simply means that the brain is capable of reshaping its own connections in response to experience. It is not a fixed circuit board. It is more like a living forest where new paths can be worn by use and old ones can grow softer through disuse. Learn a new language and the shape of your brain changes. Take up a musical instrument in adulthood and the connections in certain regions thicken. Grieve deeply and other regions quietly adjust their sensitivity for a time, which means the mind is not a completed thing. It is more like an instrument that is still being built while it is being played. And this simple fact carries a very soft, very unexpected implication. Some have wondered whether an unfinished instrument might have been designed or shaped over time for something more than the world it lives in. Because the brain is not merely capable of modeling this reality, it is capable of modeling realities it has never experienced. It can imagine colors it has never seen, sounds it has never heard, situations that could not physically occur. It can construct entire dream worlds from scratch, every night, with landscapes and characters and rules of their own. Why should such a capacity exist? What does it help us do, in strictly practical terms, to be able to model impossible situations? Some evolutionary scientists suggest that this ability may have grown out of the usefulness of planning. The more scenarios a mind can imagine, the better it can prepare for real ones. But that explanation, while helpful, does not quite cover the range of what the mind can produce. It does not fully explain why we so easily imagine flight, why we so effortlessly build worlds where our bodies do not exist. There is a softer possibility, held gently by some thinkers who prefer to leave the mystery mysterious, that the mind is, in some quiet sense, larger than the environment it evolved to navigate, that it exceeds its own purpose, that it has been given or has grown a spaciousness that outpaces the demands of survival. This does not mean we know why. It only means we can notice, without insisting on an answer, that the mind seems built less for the world as it is, and more for worlds that might be. And if that is even partially true, then flying dreams become an especially fitting expression of this quality. Because flight, in the outer world, is not necessary to any human life. No survival depends on it, and yet the mind reaches for it effortlessly in the softest hours of every night, all across the planet. Some have wondered whether this hints at something quietly humbling, that we may not fully understand what our own minds are for, that the tool in our skull may extend, in ways we cannot yet see, into questions and possibilities that our current lives have barely begun to explore. The instrument is still tuning, and when it plays in sleep, the songs it produces sometimes include melodies of rising. We have been walking slowly around a single quiet question all night. Why can we fly in our dreams when we cannot in life? And we have circled it from many soft angles: the architecture of the body, the silence of the inner ear, the map inside the brain, the dreams shared across cultures, the old wings painted on cave walls, the metaphors woven into language, the astronaut's strange familiarity with weightlessness, the unfinished instrument of the mind. None of these taken alone gives a full answer, and perhaps, if you sit with it patiently, none of them was ever meant to. Some questions in life are like knots waiting to be untied. Others are more like small rooms. You enter them not to solve them, but to be inside them for a while, and to notice how you feel by the time you leave. The question of dream flight seems to belong to the second kind. There are several soft possibilities we have touched. Perhaps flight in dreams is an emotional metaphor, the mind's shorthand for release. Perhaps it is a memory of some deep ancestor who once lived among branches. Perhaps it is a signal from the sleeping brain, freed from the constant report of gravity, freely modeling any body it wishes. Perhaps it is a symbol woven into the shared inner architecture of our species. Perhaps it is a rehearsal for something we cannot yet name. Perhaps it is a mystery science has not fully caught up to. Any of these could be partly right. Any combination could be more accurate. And it is possible, quietly, that the whole answer lies somewhere none of us has yet imagined. That flight in dreams is one small opening onto a much larger question about what consciousness is, what dreams are for, and why the human mind seems so much wider than the world it lives in. Some have wondered whether it is even a good idea to solve such a question fully, because part of what the flying dream gives us, night after night, is its softness, its refusal to be pinned down, its ability to feel meaningful without requiring an explanation. If we finally understood it entirely, might we lose something? Might the dream feel a little smaller in the morning if we had already reduced it to a formula? There is something gentle in leaving certain doors slightly ajar, not closed so that we forget them, not fully open so that all the mystery drains out, just ajar so that the wonder can continue to breathe. And perhaps this is the quietest and truest thing we can carry away tonight, that the mind and the sky may be, in some way we cannot quite describe, part of a single unresolved question. Two halves of a wondering, the mind reaching upward, the sky reaching downward, the two meeting in the strange, luminous middle place we call dreaming. Some questions are meant to be lived with, not answered. This may be one of them. The night, in its long, patient way, does not seem to mind. It simply keeps offering the dream. Generation after generation, sleeper after sleeper, in villages and cities and quiet rooms all over this small planet, the sky returns, softly, whenever the eyes close, and the question stays open, like a window left ajar at the edge of thought, letting the cool air of wonder drift back in. We have travelled a long, quiet path together tonight, beginning with the surprising fact that nearly every human alive has flown, though only in the dark hours, moving through the careful architecture of the body, so beautifully shaped for the ground it walks upon, through the sleeping mind, which rises even when the body cannot, through the private physics of dreams, through the long history of humans reaching, in myth and machine, toward a sky they could not enter, and through the soft possibility that the impossibility of flight is not a lack but a doorway. If there is a single quiet thread through all of it, it may be this. The inability to fly with our bodies is not, in the end, a small deprivation. It is one of the shapes that made us who we are. Some have wondered how much of what we treasure about being human comes from what we cannot do. The hands that cannot fly became the hands that build, write, hold, heal. The eyes that cannot see infrared became the eyes that turn to the stars and imagined worlds beyond them. The lungs that cannot rise into thin air became the voice that whispers to a sleeping child. Every limit, in its own quiet way, opened another door. Every closed sky opened another inner one. And the flying dream, in this reading, is not just a nightly gift. It is a soft nightly reminder that the mind carries something the body could never carry. That the shape of being human, though bound to the ground during the day, was never entirely earthbound. Not deep down, not where the dreams live. There is a small and gentle comfort in that, because whatever weight you have been carrying this day, the tiredness of a long week, the pressure of thoughts that would not stop, the quiet ache of things not going quite the way you hoped, none of it is the whole shape of you. You are the walker, yes, but you are also the dreamer. You are the body pressed into the mattress, and you are the one who has, without noticing, already lifted many times on many other nights. Some have said that our lives are made of two rhythms, quietly braided together. The rhythm of the day, where gravity is the law, and the rhythm of the night, where gravity becomes a gentle suggestion. Both are yours. Both belong to the strange, spacious creature you have always been. There is nothing left now that needs to be solved. Nothing further that needs to be understood before rest is allowed to come. The mystery has been walked gently from many angles, and the mystery, being the sort of thing it is, remains a mystery. It was never going to be otherwise. It never needed to be. Perhaps that is what the night has been quietly saying, from the very first sentence, that some things do not need to be answered in order to be enough, that some questions are not doors we walk through, but shelters we rest inside. That flight, in the way we experience it in dreams, may be one of these shelters, a place the species has always been able to return to, a place that has, in some soft way, been waiting for you all along, on every night of your life. You have arrived at it many times, you may arrive at it again tonight. There is a certain kind of tiredness that comes from wanting to understand everything, not the tiredness of a long day of work, a different kind, the tiredness of a mind that keeps turning over the same questions, looking for the piece that finally fits, wondering when the picture will become clear. Many of us carry a small version of this tiredness into bed with us, not always about big questions, sometimes just about the day, sometimes just about a conversation, sometimes about something quieter, harder to name. But tonight, there is another way to be with the questions, softer, slower, something closer to the way water holds a stone. You do not have to solve it. You do not have to arrange the pieces. You do not have to reach any conclusion at all. Some have described this posture as sitting with wonder. Others have called it the art of leaving a question open long enough for it to breathe. Either way, it is not a passive state. It is a quiet form of attention. The mind is still there, still noticing, still curious, but it is no longer demanding, and in that gentle release, the body seems to notice something. The shoulders drift down a little. The breath grows slightly deeper. The jaw, so often held tight without our permission, loosens. It turns out that the effort of trying to resolve everything was itself a small form of gravity, and when we set it down, even briefly, we become a little lighter. Perhaps this is one of the small, unadvertised gifts of dreaming. When the mind moves into sleep, it stops trying to resolve the puzzles it was carrying. It stops asking whether something makes sense. It simply enters the story, whatever the story is, and lets itself be part of it. There is a kind of peace in that surrender that we rarely allow ourselves during the day. Tonight, no answer is required from you. Not about flight, not about dreams, not about anything the day left unfinished. The questions can rest, exactly as they are, in whatever unfinished shape they hold. They will still be there in the morning if they need to be. Or perhaps, softened by the night, they will have quietly become something smaller, something easier to live with, something you no longer feel you need to hold. The mind, given permission to circle rather than conclude, begins to slow. The thoughts do not vanish, they just stop pulling. They drift like small clouds far above the room, no longer demanding anything of you. Notice, for a moment, the way your body is being held right now. Not by any effort you are making, by the surface beneath you, the mattress, the pillow, the quiet firmness that keeps you exactly where you are. That soft resistance is coming, in the end, from the same force that has been the theme of everything we have talked about tonight. Gravity. We tend to think of gravity as something that pulls us down, and it does, but if you turn the thoughts slightly, another shape appears. Gravity is also what holds us close, to the earth, to one another, to this small room, at this moment, with the low light around it, and the soft breathing of the night outside. Without gravity, nothing would settle. Objects would drift apart. Bodies would float untethered. Even the smallest gathering of family or friends around a table would not be possible in quite the same way. Every embrace, every hand on a shoulder, every warm mug held between two palms, all of it depends on a planet that gently insists we stay near it. Seen from this angle, the pull that shaped our bones is not a burden. It is a kind of intimacy. The earth quietly holding us for our whole lives, without ever asking to be noticed. Some have said that our first understanding of being loved began, long before we could speak, with the feeling of being held, being carried, being placed down gently, being lifted up again. If that is true, then some part of us learned about tenderness through the same force that today keeps the mattress soft beneath the back. Tonight, the weight of your body settling into the bed is not a problem to solve. It is not something to be lifted or resisted. It is simply the shape of belonging, the gentle press of gravity translated into the soft comfort of a surface that has been shaped, over generations, to receive it. You are being held, not metaphorically, literally, by an entire planet, quietly, from the inside of its core to the surface of your skin. It has held you every night of your life. It will hold you again tonight. It will not stop. There is nothing left to hold yourself up for. The floor is already carrying the room. The bed is already carrying the body. The earth is already carrying the bed. And something older than the earth, whatever it is that arranged the world so gently, has already been carrying the whole slow story of everything you are. Slowly now, the night has grown deeper, the room around you has grown softer, the thoughts that arrived earlier one by one are quieting, and somewhere behind your closed eyes, if you allow the mind to drift just a little further, another kind of space begins to open. You have been here before, many times. Every dream you have ever had began in this exact soft threshold, the place between the waking room and the wider inner one. It has always been kind to you. It has always let you in. Perhaps tonight, if the mind is ready, that inner room will offer a sky, or perhaps it will offer something quieter, a field, a hallway, a warm voice, a face you loved a long time ago. Whatever it offers, you do not need to choose. You do not need to guide it. You do not need to steer. Just as, when you finally fall asleep, some part of you will lift, softly, without effort, without warning, and you will not be aware, in that moment, that anything has changed. You will simply be somewhere else, somewhere your body did not need to travel with you. If the sky returns tonight, meet it gently, the way you would meet an old friend at the edge of a familiar road. There is nothing to prepare for, nothing to bring. The rising, when it comes, will not require your permission. It will be as easy as the breath you are taking right now. And if no sky comes tonight, if the dreams are quieter, or elsewhere, or forgotten by morning, that is enough as well. You have already been carried by this room, by this planet, by the long, slow inheritance of every human who has ever laid down and closed their eyes and let the day loosen. Rising, in the end, was never really about leaving the ground. It was about knowing that some part of you was never fully bound to it in the first place, that the weight of the body was only ever half of the story, that the mind is a wider country than the map suggests, that the sky above the room and the sky behind your eyes are quietly, mysteriously part of the same softness. The ceiling above you will dissolve in a few moments. You will not notice when. You do not have to. Rest now.